My parents gave me this tool case way back when I was first starting out and doing some troubleshooting in the field. This case has been through the war. So the case used to have a tool panel that was strapped in here, which could contain pliers and screwdrivers and things. But that got rotten over the decades that this has been around. But when you're making a magic tool case, the important thing is to figure out what you need to carry. And there's a lot of choices to be made. You can't carry the whole lab with you. So that's what this little video is going to be about, is how to choose what you put in here. When this is about the largest size you would really want to carry around. When this is full of steel, it's pretty heavy. Let's start by having a look in this dirt tool case, which I just got recently from one of the Element 14 promotional contests. It has a nice selection of screwdrivers and nut drivers, including a screwdriver here that can adjust potentiometers. It has some soldering equipment, a soldering iron, solder sucker, solder, tweezers, files, solder wick, a couple of pliers, and side cutters, and an adjustable wrench. So that's a nice start, but what we really want is a few extra tools. So I'm going to talk about what's missing from this kit. The first thing that's missing from this kit is wire strippers. So here's an example. I've tried all different kinds of wire strippers. Here's another one. You can adjust this one. Well, you can adjust them all. Or, of course, you have wire strippers built into devices like this crimper with various wire sizes here. But when you're trying to find room in a crowded kit, I always end up with something like this. Simple. You can adjust it with this little screw here. And if you're careful, you can strip quite well with these. Lots of people claim that you're going to nick wires, but I found these to be very handy and I use them all the time. Next up, I'm going to talk a bit about specialized pliers. The ones that were in the kit weren't very small, they were quite large. Here's a real set of needle nose pliers, and you may want things like this for specialized work. And when you're going on a job, it's nice to have your best tools with you, as long as they're small enough to fit in the case. Or the side cutters that were in there were quite large. Here's a nice small set that's good for smaller work, and you may need those if you're working on something delicate. Another tool that's very handy in a lot of situations, of course, is vice grips, and you may need something like this when you don't know what you're going to run into. These can serve as a vise or any kind of pliers. They can really get a good grip, so I always carry a set of these, and you just have to decide which size you want, because they're available in larger sizes. So I already showed a set of crimpers. A crimper is a very useful tool that is needed in every toolkit. This one can handle various sizes of wire crimps, but you also may need specialized crimpers that can handle more complicated crimps at the end. And here's an example. It just depends on the job you're going on, or you may need, something that can actually crimp an RJ connector or something like that. So you might need specialized crimpers. Another tool that I like to have with me, if I can fit it in, is a insulation displacement tool, which can actually push the wire into an insulation displacement connector. And I've made a lot of use of this particular tool. They're not cheap, but they're really fast when you need to make a lot of connections. I also like to have a center punch with me, just in case I run into something that requires marking or scribing. And very handy tool. Other things missing from the kit are Robertson screwdrivers. Around here, Robertson heads are quite popular. So here's a stubby little screwdriver. And of course it can have any kind of a bit in here. And the handle is full of bits. So that can fit in the case. And gives you lots of different flexibility if you want to carry a bunch of bits. It could probably even carry Allen keys. Or you might carry a whole set by itself. Another handy tool that I like to have with me is a wire wrap tool. I have electric wire wrap tools, but this one is much smaller. It has a wire stripper, an extraction tool, and a wire wrapping end as well. Very handy for making jumpers. And of course, cutting tools. You're going to need very sharp knives, such as an X-Acto knife, and maybe a small little utility knife like this. You can get much larger ones, of course, but smaller is better when it comes to packing a full case. And of course, you need scissors. Lightweight plastic handles. Now for measurement, of course you might want a tape measure. That with maybe one with a level built in. Or for fine work you may want a caliper of some sort. This is a nice digital device. Gives you very accurate readings. I use that all the time, every day. And for delicate work, of course, you're going to want a magnifying glass. This is huge though, so what you may need is something like this, which is a small magnifying glass with more than one lens in it, so you can get lots of different magnifications out of this depending on which of these 4 lenses you stack up on each other. So you can get this, that, and each of these can be by itself or with a lens on top of it. So there are lots of combinations to get magnification out of this little box. When it comes to screwdrivers, you may have your own favorite little set of jeweler screwdrivers. I like that one just because it's cool. As far as electronic instrumentation, you're going to need a multimeter. Try and fit this in the picture. But that's huge, so you might want a smaller one. So I don't know if I would go to anything this cheap. Out in the field, that might be a little bit of a risk, but I might take something in between like this, depending on how much room I had in my case. The second instrument you're going to want is an oscilloscope, but of course you're going to have trouble fitting that into your case, so you can get something small like this, which is a great little oscilloscope. Not super high bandwidth, but it's very useful when you're just looking at low frequency signals. And the size is right, the price is right. This is a 4-channel color scope based on an ARM Cortex chip. Depending on what the job is, you may need some other meters. This is a multi-field meter. Pretty handy if you have to measure RF, field strength, and magnetic noise, etc. This is a thermometer. Pretty handy if you have to do a lot of temperature measurements. Some other specialized test instrumentation you might want is some sort of cable tester. This one measures RJ45s, RJ11s, etc. So another thing you need, of course, is a camera. If your cell phone is not very good, you can always carry around a GoPro camera or something else that's small and takes good pictures. Now you're going to need lots of little cables, heat shrink, and possibly power supplies. So here's, a typical USB power supply that folds into a connector that plugs into a socket. It's always handy to have a selection of adapters, connector adapters with you. You just got to choose which ones you want. All sorts of different connectors and adapters. These things save lives. At least they save your project pretty often. Another thing I always have when I head out into the field is a whole selection of fasteners in some kind of Tupperware box. So screws, nuts, washers, standoffs, whatever. Now I have, screws in proper bins at home, but when I head out into the field, I just have a whole mess of them in one box like this. And I do the same thing with resistors and capacitors. I have some sort of Tupperware container filled with a whole selection jumbled up capacitors and resistors and components, transistors, diodes, LEDs, you name it. And of course I have another box full of wire and different kinds of wire, all tangled up, but everything is there in one big pile.